Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to my video series outlining the first year of ownership with a used Mercedes Benz product out of warranty. This is the 6th episode, and I'm sorry to report that I have actually encountered my first problem with this car. What you're probably wondering is whether or not this is a major issue, so I'll get into that. For about a week solid, I would come out to the car, and if it's early in the morning or maybe after work and it's been sitting for a little bit, I would hit the start button and the starter would drag. And if any of you have encountered this issue, you know exactly what I'm talking about, where you hit the starter button and it just kind of goes and then it starts up. And the first thing I thought was it's probably going to be a starter. And I researched it a little bit, and it does look like kind of a pain to change, but I wasn't going to jump to conclusions just yet. I wanted to do a little bit more troubleshooting and find out if that was exactly the issue. One of the red flags that told me maybe it's not a starter is that a lot of times, if it had been running recently, there wouldn't be an issue. So it was usually just if it sat for a while. But there were actually occasions where I'd hit the starter button and it wouldn't turn at all. But then I'd hit it again and it would fire right up. So I'm thinking, well, if it's a battery, most likely it's not going to do that. It's not going to start up immediately after failing to start the first time and failing to even turn the engine over. But as with newer computer-controlled automobiles, you never really know. Sometimes they do act a little funny with electronics. So, being a former hydraulic mechanic, we were always taught that you want to troubleshoot, test, and test some more before you just start throwing parts at it. So the first thing I wanted to do was just to make sure that my battery was good. So I tested the voltage after it had been sitting for a while, and the voltage was reading a little low. Now with AGM batteries, sometimes it's hard to tell because the AGM battery, which is absorbent glass matte, they're different than a regular lead acid battery. They have a pretty wide range of voltage that can be considered good. Some of them can be bad and still show decent voltage, and other ones, if they have a couple of bad cells, maybe they will read really low. But it was reading a little on the low side. So that told me that that was something to look into. So before I did anything with the starter, I went ahead and pulled the battery and I took it to a local auto parts store that could load test the battery. Because you can't, again, really tell a whole lot by just a simple multimeter voltage test. So I took it to a parts store and had it load tested, where they can basically simulate a high load situation and see how many amps you're getting out of that battery in a high load situation. Could simulate a starter being turned or something like that. So after doing that, it did test poorly, and that was where I was going to start. I'm going to replace this battery and see if the problem goes away, because even if I do have a starter that's starting to go bad, the battery tested poorly, it was reading a little low on voltage, so it's going to need to be changed anyway. So these AGM batteries are not cheap, but they are a good quality battery. And you know, these cars require some things out of their batteries that maybe a typical older car won't require. So the battery that was in it was a Mercedes Benz battery, which I know Mercedes doesn't make their own batteries. I mean, they're all made, most all batteries are made by Johnson Controls for some brand, but what goes into those batteries can be very different. So not all batteries are created equal, and I understand that. But looking at the manufacturing date on the battery, it showed that it was 2.5 years old, which is a pretty short lifespan for a battery. But if prior to my ownership, this car had maybe sat for several days or weeks at a time without being driven, that can be a little hard on these batteries too. So you never really know exactly how it was treated. But instead of buying a battery from the Mercedes brand, I'll show you exactly what I bought and why I did that. So this is the battery that I ended up going with. This is an Autocraft Platinum. It was bought locally here at Advance Auto, and it's a $200 battery. So they're not cheap, but you don't necessarily want to cheap out when you're buying parts for these cars. And again, I didn't go with the Mercedes battery, which I believe is actually made by Varta. Again, most all batteries are manufactured by Johnson Control to some capacity, 4 different brands, but they do manufacture them a little differently depending on the brand they're going to. But so this is what I ended up going with, and after changing the battery, everything was just fine. So there was no more starter dragging. It ended up just being the battery, and probably had a bad cell or two. And after it had sat for a little while, it was causing the starter to drag anytime I would start it up. And while it never did leave me stranded, I was running the risk of being stranded had it failed entirely. So that is repaired. No issues since, and that's been about 2 weeks ago. Also, I went ahead and completed my oil change for the second time, and without turning this into an impromptu how-to video or even a discussion on what particular brand of oil or filter to use, I will tell you what I go with, and that is the Mobil 1 European Car Formula 0W40. And there are other good brands, I understand. You may not use this, you may use something else, and of course that's perfectly fine. And then for the filter, you can buy these in multi-packs off of Amazon or eBay, and this is a good German fleece filter made by Man. I actually bought a 2-pack of these for, I believe it was $12. So they're very inexpensive, but it is a very high quality filter. Again, it's fleece, not paper, which tends to break down a lot more slowly than the paper ones. So good quality filter, good quality oil. It holds 9 quarts. So the first time I actually used a vacuum pump to evacuate the system through the dipstick, it took a little longer than I'd like. So this time I went ahead and just removed the pan underneath and drained it from the oil pan the old-fashioned way, and I was able to do it a lot more quickly that way. So I think from here on out, that's the way I'll do it. But that's everything, folks. Car's doing great, and thank you for joining me. Please check in next month for the 7th video in this series, and enjoy your day. Thanks for watching.